A bag of Brach's candy cans still sit on an American retail shelf today, close to the checkout lane, close to Halloween bags, close to the small purchases people barely think about. But the Chicago factory that helped make that name familiar ended in a different kind of record, a property transfer listed at $1. For decades, Brach's was tied to a 22-acre plant on West Kinsey Street, a place built to turn sugar, corn starch, steam labor, and rail lines into candy at national scale. Its products moved into grocery aisles, some drugstores, and pick-a-mix bins across the country. Then the name stayed on the shelf while the place behind it lost its role. This is not a story about candy disappearing. It is a story about how a familiar brand survived by leaving behind the industrial city that made it recognizable. In 1904, Emil Brach opened a candy shop on Chicago's North Avenue with about $1,000 in capital. The storefront was small. The idea behind it was not. Candy in the city often sold for around 50 cents a pound. Brach offered it for 20 cents a pound. That price did not work unless the shop could move volume by ingredients carefully and keep each batch consistent enough for repeat customers. The early operation was plain. Cane sugar came in by rail from the Gulf. Corn starch came from Midwest millers. Kettles handled batches that could reach 500 pounds at a time. Wax paper wrappers turned loose candy into something that could travel. From there, the product moved through Chicago in a practical way. Horse-drawn wagons carried candy to corner stores, newsstands, and neighborhood counters across the South and West Sides. A small purchase could sit beside a newspaper, a cigar box, or a jar near the register. Brach's did not need to make candy feel rare. It needed to make candy feel reachable. That was the first pressure built into the company. A lower price created more buyers, but more buyers required more output. The storefront could introduce the promise. It could not carry the promise for long. By the end of the first years, Brach's was no longer only a shop with a cheaper pound of candy. It was becoming a root ingredient supplier, kettle wrapper, wagon counter customer. Each piece had to keep moving for the price to hold. The candy was simple. The arrangement behind it was already becoming harder to keep small. To keep selling at that price, Brach's would need more than a storefront. It would need land machinery workers and a factory built around the movement of sugar. By 1923, Brach's had outgrown the shop, the wagon routes, and the small rooms where a kettle could define the day. The company moved its future to a 22-acre tract on West Kinsey Street near the Chicago River. That location mattered. Sugar, starch, paper, coal, and finished candy all needed movement. A factory that large could not survive on charm or memory. It needed rail cars loading bays, storage rooms, boilers, conveyors, and workers who could keep one section from slowing the next. Inside the plant, candy became a sequence. Ingredients entered in bulk. Kettles cooked large batches. Drying floors held product until it was ready to move. Wrapping machines turned loose candy into units that could be counted, boxed, shipped, and reordered. A private rail siding could connect the plant to distant stores without treating Chicago as the final market. The factory made Brach's larger. It also made the company more concentrated. More of the promise now passed through one address, one set of machines, one labor force, and one daily rhythm. If a batch was late, the wrapping room felt it. If packaging slowed, a shipment waited. If rail cars did not leave on time, the shelf somewhere else would eventually show the delay. For the people who worked there, scale had a different shape. It looked like shift gates, time cards, warehouse aisles, maintenance crews, clerks, machinists, packers, and floor supervisors. A candy company had become a workplace with many occupations inside it. Every job was tied to the same flow: sugar entering, candy leaving, orders returning. Then Brach's found another way to make the factory reach beyond its walls. In 1958, the company introduced pick-a-mix. The object was simple open bins, a scoop, a paper bag, and a shopper choosing by hand. But for retailers, the bins did more than display candy. They turned candy into motion. A customer could stop, choose, add more, and create a purchase without waiting for a clerk to recommend a box. That small retail act changed the pressure on the plant. More stores wanted the bins. More bins required more variety. More variety required tighter coordination between production, packaging, shipping, and replenishment. By the early 1960s, Brach's was no longer only making candy for Chicago neighborhoods. Its name was appearing in supermarkets and drugstores across the country. The plant on West Kinsey was no longer just a place where candy was cooked. It had become the physical center of a retail habit. A shopper saw a scoop and a bin. Behind that small choice stood land steam rail labor packaging and a factory that had to keep answering the shelf. September 7th, 1948. Inside the West Kinsey plant, the night shift was working through the hours when most of Chicago was asleep. In a factory built around sugar and starch, dust was not a background detail. It moved through tunnels, settled around equipment, and gathered where cleaning and ventilation did not keep up with production. In one conveyor tunnel, cornstarch dust became part of the plant's hidden weather. At about 3 in the morning, that dust ignited. The force traveled through the building with the speed of a problem that had been stored for too long. Floors failed. Brick and steel gave way. Workers who had entered the plant for an ordinary shift were suddenly inside the cost of a factory that had concentrated too much movement heat powder and pressure in one place. The official findings would later point to conditions that could be named dust removal that was not enough for the scale of work filters that did not match the hazard cleaning routines that had not kept the tunnels clear. 11 men were killed. 18 others were injured. Those numbers should not be used as decoration. They show where the factory's promise met the limits of its own discipline. The plant kept operating after the disaster. The brand kept growing. The bins, bags, wrappers, and shipments continued to carry Brach's into American stores. But the explosion had revealed something important about West Kinsey. The same concentration that made national production possible also meant that a failure inside one part of the plant could spread through the whole place. By 1966, another kind of distance entered the company. After more than 6 decades, the Brach family sold the business to American Home Products. The assets, trademarks, and production network now belonged to a corporation whose center of gravity was not the old Chicago factory. That did not make collapse immediate. The plant still had workers. The shelves still had candy. Pick-a-mix still gave retailers a reason to keep ordering. But the question around West Kinsey had changed. It was no longer only how much candy the factory could make. It was who would decide what that factory was worth, and what pressures those owners would answer first. In 1987, Klaus Jacobs acquired Brach's for about $730 million. On paper, the purchase looked like a move into a large American candy business, with national shelf space, recognized products, and a factory that still carried enormous productive capacity. But an acquisition changes more than the name at the top of a document. It changes the room where decisions are made. It changes which costs become urgent, which relationships are kept, and which parts of a company are treated as knowledge rather than expense. Within the first months, senior executives were removed. Long-standing managers and supplier relationships were put under review. Domestic contracts that had supported the old Chicago operation were no longer protected by habit. Procurement, marketing, production, and distribution now had to answer a different owner with a different timetable. For a factory like West Kinsey, that mattered. Candy was not only sugar in a kettle, it was timing. It was cornstarch arriving when the line expected it. It was packaging ordered in the right quantity. It was a buyer at a grocery chain knowing that the bin would be refilled before the next weekend. When those links became unstable, the effect did not stay inside an office. It reached the floor. It reached the warehouse. It reached the shelf. The second pressure came from a smaller object, a pound of sugar. For American candy makers, sugar was not a decorative ingredient. It was one of the main costs inside the product. United States sugar policy kept domestic prices above world prices for years through supports quotas and import limits. The exact gap changed over time, but the direction was clear. A company making candy inside the United States often bought sugar under a different cost structure than a factory outside it. That difference became harder to absorb as retail chains pushed for price variety and steady supply. A candy bag on a shelf looked simple. Behind it were ingredient contracts, wage rates, shipping costs, shelf allowances, and the question of where the same product could be made for less. In 1994, NAFTA changed another part of the map. Candy made in Mexico could cross into the United States under conditions that made the border less of a wall and more of a route. Mexican plants could buy sugar closer to world prices higher at lower wage rates and ship finished candy back into the same retail channels where Brach's had once expanded through bins and bags. That did not mean one law, one owner, or one decision closed West Kinsey. The pressure was layered. Ownership wanted costs cut. Retailers wanted dependable volume at the right price. Ingredients cost more in one geography than another. The old Chicago factory still had scale, but scale was no longer the only advantage that mattered. By the end of the 1980s, the numbers had started to show the strain. Brach's reported losses after decades of strength. Market share fell. The company that had once used price to open a working-class market was now caught inside a different price problem. The brand still had a place on the shelf. The question was whether Chicago still had a place inside the brand. In 2003, the West Kinsey factory entered the record in a different form. Not as a plant expansion, not as a product launch, not as a new retail program, as a property transfer. The listed price was $1. That number needs to be handled carefully. It did not mean the Brach's name was worth $1. It did not mean the candy business had no value. It meant the factory site itself had crossed into another category. The place that once held boilers, conveyors drying floors, packing lines, workers' rail movement, and national orders had become a problem of land liability, vacancy, and reuse. By then, West Kinsey no longer carried the same role inside the company. Production had moved through other arrangements. The brand could still appear in stores. Candy could still be made, shipped, and sold. But the old Chicago plant was no longer the necessary center of that movement. Empty factories lose their purpose before they lose their walls. Windows break. Machinery is removed. Floors that once carried shifts begin to carry weather. Loading areas stop waiting for trucks. Rail connections become details on an old map. The building remains visible, but the work that explained it has already left. In 2007, the vacant factory found a strange second life. Warner Brothers used the site for the Dark Knight dressing part of the old plant as Gotham Hospital. The explosion that appeared on screen was staged for a film, but the material beneath it was not fiction. It was the shell of a Chicago candy factory that had already lost its industrial use. The final removal came later. In 2014, Chicago issued demolition approval for the remaining structure. Crews moved through the site, taking down what production had left behind years earlier. The collapse did not happen only when the walls came down. It had happened earlier when the factory stopped being required by the brand that still carried its name. A present-day map of 4656 West Kinsey Street that no longer shows the place as a working candy plant. The address remains. The role does not. For most viewers, Brach's is easier to find on a shelf than in Chicago's industrial memory. The bag can still carry a familiar name. The candy can still move through warehouses, retailers, seasonal displays, and checkout lanes. But the old route through West Kinsey is gone. That is the harder shape of this story. Brach's did not disappear in the simple way a closed company disappears. Its name kept moving. Its products kept finding buyers. What changed was the arrangement behind the name, the ingredients, the ownership, the factory, the geography, and the city that once made the brand feel physically rooted. A shopper today may see only a small bag of candy. A former worker would have known something larger behind it: boiler starch, dust rail sidings, packing lines, shift gates, and the daily pressure of keeping a low-priced product moving toward the shelf. At West Kinsey, the building is no longer there to explain that connection. The shelf still carries the name, the address carries the absence. A bag of Brach's candy remains under fluorescent light.